Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Educating Matters with Jim O'Connell. It's Tuesday, December 12th. If you're watching live, we're live from 6 to 7 p.m. on Tuesday. The call-in number is 640-3091. I'd be very happy to hear from you if you have any comments or questions, or whether you agree with me or not. I'm happy to accept your comments on air. So once again, the number is 640-3091. I'd just like to start tonight thinking about the season that is in it. A lot of good things happened coming up to the Christmas season in terms of people donating to charities, etc. But just without going into the details of why, I just happened to come across a few particularly tough or sad situations that kids are in over recent days that I don't want to go into here. It's not directly associated with me. I just happened to be around when some of this stuff was going on, and so the point is that these we hear in the background things like Toys for Tots with the Marine Corps out of Londonderry, where they collect there, and then all the programs, like the Sacred Heart has got a donation place for clothes, and Missy's Closet, and so many other things. The St. Vincent de Paul Society is going to be doing a major giveaway of of clothing and food, and even vouchers to shop in supermarkets and things, which will be done next Saturday. And it's just amazing the number of people who show up for these things. And sometimes, even though I'm exposed to some of this, and even I sometimes get a little jaded by it and think, how much of this is really needed, so to speak. There are a lot of people sort of maybe abusing some of those things, and so I have to admit sometimes I see this and I start thinking like that. And then when I look, but I know the truth to be much different. I know the truth to be that the need is huge. The need is much greater than we surmise, because for every family that is willing to step out into the light, so to speak, and reveal themselves to be in economic or financial trouble, or to be food insecure, or not have enough money to buy food for the weekend. For every family that steps out and sort of publicly is okay with announcing that. I mean, there are people who don't apply for the equivalent of what is now food stamps, the SNAP program, because they're embarrassed to use food stamps. So there's a whole group of many people who find themselves in these circumstances that we never get to see and don't get to know. And my main concern has to do with children. And when I see, I talked to a young man recently who was, just a middle schooler, who had a large and diverse family that was broken up in various ways, and he had stepsisters and stepbrothers and full brothers and etc. And the family was located in 4 or 5 different places, didn't really have one home. And there's a lot of issues there, and so this young man was heading into the Christmas holidays with no expectation of getting a gift, with no expectation of sitting by a nice warm fire and eating a nice meal on Christmas Day. And so, if it was just one person one time, then I would understand it. My point, ladies and gentlemen, is that for many people who have children in school and they think that sort of everybody's like them, that everybody is sort of going home to a to a reasonable house with reasonable parents, and sadly, it's just not the case for so many people. I know that lots of organizations try to help. Another organization that I'm involved in, and you won't be surprised, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which is Hibernia, Ireland. It's an Irish a group for old codgers like me, I guess, who are Irish. But one of the primary things the Ancient Order of Hibernians is known for in Manchester is, of course, the St. Patrick's Day Parade. But that organisation does a lot of other very important work that is done quietly and unannounced, and it's a pleasure to support it. But I bring them up because in a couple of weeks, they'll be going out and quietly distributing gifts and food, which the members actually bring into people's houses and homes and apartments in the city of Manchester in preparation for Christmas. And it's usually a large box of food and a turkey or whatever it may be, and then some toys, and based on the needs of what that particular family might be. But when you go out and join them on this delivery, where groups of us get together, 5 or 6 people, go to each house, and it's just amazing to see the way see how some people live. And I'd like to recount an example from last Christmas, because I'm sure we're going to see the same thing in 2 weeks' time. Last Christmas, it was the week before Christmas, and we were out distributing food and goods to some families in Manchester, and we went into one a particular place, and while some of the homes were challenging in different ways, and this particular house that we went into, this apartment was a third floor apartment. In Manchester, and when we got in, it turns out that there were either 2 or 3 families living there, and we walked in. It was a very, very cold day in December, and when we went up you had to go up the fire escape, up the outside of the flights of stairs, and the wooden stairs on the outside. When we got up to the top, somebody opened the door, and they were so happy to see us. And there was no heating in the apartment, and the children from that apartment, there was at least 2 families, maybe 3. I think it was 2 families at least. I know it was 2 families at least. So the kids were in school at that particular time. It was around about 2:00 in the afternoon, and we went in, and there were 4 people, a man and an older man and 3 women. And they had an electric, a plug-in electric fire, one of those ones, really old metal one, where the grill shines bright red. The heat comes off it. They're kind of dangerous because they're a fire hazard. If you touch a piece of paper off it or anything, it'll obviously go on fire. If it falls over, could cause a fire. And then God knows, with the power that it's drawing through the electrical system in an old building like that, whether the circuitry and wiring in such a building was ever designed to draw that much power to heat that thing is questionable. So the image, I don't know how many of you are interested in art and things, but there's a famous painting by Rembrandt called The Potato Eaters, and you can Google it and look it up. But it's a dark, as many Rembrandts are. It's a dark, perhaps dark in both metaphorical and literal senses. But there are a group of people gathered around a pot with potatoes in it, and it's in the Dutch countryside. Well, you don't know that from looking at the painting. The painting is of the interior of a house, but it's dark, and it's a wonderful painting because it's the way the light in the painting is reflected onto the various prominent points on the three or four individuals' faces. So there's lots of darkness and shadow and light on the individual faces as they're bent around his bowl. And that was the image that occurred to me as I looked at these people in this apartment in Manchester last year. That here they were on the week before Christmas, and they had children coming home from Manchester schools into an apartment that was not fit to have children in it. Now, I have to say that in that circumstance, one of the members of the Ancient Order of Hibernians who probably doesn't want to be named, so we're not going to do that. But he took it upon himself to fix this situation, and I don't want to bore you with the details, but I was very proud of him that he was able to fix this situation and had it resolved, and had before the end of that day. But it's just a picture of what goes on, and as people prepare for Christmas, my point here, if you're not getting it, is just the reality of the need and of the want. And I tie it into education just because I'm very aware of the fact that our schools have to deal with kids from these environments. This is so measuring kids and wondering why a kid coming out of that house, that his homework assignment isn't as neat or as well done or as well thought out or whatever as the kid from a different house. There really is no mystery, and so I sort of rail against those who measure our school system and measure our students without really understanding the nature of the way in which some of our kids live. And the other thing is that those who think that there's some robust welfare system that is there to help these people, it just couldn't be further from the truth. Now, I know people's heads may be popping because I'm sure that if you look deeply, you will find people who abuse what little system there is. I'm very confident that that's the case. I know it's the case. It's just how it is. Some people sort of were born to abuse the system, and they live that life of almost like scavengers, where they're using every possible method they can to avail themselves of whatever programs are available. But the programs are not very robust. And I'll give you another example from a couple of years ago that is very apropos given the Christmas season. But I remember when I was in one of the Catholic Church's parishes in the Greater Manchester area, when a call came in, and it was one of the parishes was seeking to. It was late in the afternoon, and they were trying to find some people to put together like $80 so that a husband and wife and a pretty newborn baby could have a place to stay. And what had happened was a family was traveling south from somewhere north of here. They lived in southern Massachusetts. There was, like today, it was earlier, there was a snowstorm. And so their car broke down on 93 or 293 within the Manchester city limits, and so they couldn't afford to. The car was towed off the highway. They couldn't afford to get it repaired, at least not at that moment and at that time. They did have some family down, Taunton or Fall River or somewhere in that area. But here was a husband and wife with a month-old or 3-week-old or 4-week-old, a very young baby with no place to stay in the city of Manchester. And I'm just reminded of it because I think about, Mary and Joseph and the infant Jesus seeking a place to stay. But this was Manchester just a few years ago, not that many years ago. And the people think, well, there are charities there, go to charity. Well, they are, but most of them are to the pin of their collar. And in that particular instance, one wonderful man was making phone calls because he didn't have $80. He was looking to put together $80 so he could rent a room in a motel in Manchester, so at least they'd have a room for the night. And his method was to call up the various parish offices of the various Catholic churches in Manchester. And of course, you go to those offices, there's often a semi-volunteer, often an elderly person, and they're putting their hands in their pockets and taking out $5 and donating $5 each to put together a pool of money so these people would have a place to stay. So, in one sense, that's just one anecdote, and it doesn't tell you everything. But it also is clear there is no lavish office in downtown Manchester where you can sort of drive over there and say, "Here I am," and everything is magically sort of is done for you. And that's taking nothing away from all the agencies in Manchester that do such great work. There are lots of agencies. But my point here this afternoon is to say that more help is needed. It's just like the issue with parent-teacher organizations in schools and other organizations, or the soccer boards that I've been involved with, and Little League and all the other things. There's always a greater need for volunteers than there is the number of volunteers. PTOs, parent-teacher organizations, or PTGs, or whichever they are, in the various schools in Manchester, actually are in need of more support. And they're in need of support, not just in terms of giving them $10 or something, but they're just in need of your support. They're in need of you being there. And perhaps as we head into the last 2 weeks before Christmas, there's a place that people could look about resolutions for the new year and what you might seek to do in 2018. I think volunteerism, there are just so many opportunities, and I don't have the information here in front of me, but there are a million places you can volunteer. If you're watching this show, then I guess you're probably interested in education. So if you're interested in education, the parent-teacher organizations in all the schools in this city would love to have the support of people with children in the schools, or even grandchildren in the schools. And then the other thing that I know a lot about is the sports programs in the city, and all of them. There's a constant issue about even the ones that look very robust from the outside, that have done great work, that have been around forever, and you see it's really 2 or 3 people that are organising them. A case in point would be Manchester Central Little League this year, and it was down to a couple of people, or maybe one person left to run the league, who'd already put in a lot of time, and a good friend of mine, a man I'm glad to call a friend because I'm proud of him and the things that he does and the work that he does quietly in the neighbourhood. Ara Tamzarian, he stepped in and sort of single-handedly, and with help from some others, but it was his driving force, went in and saved Manchester Central Little League, and while he was at it, established a Manchester Central Soccer League. So there's one man taking action because he sees a need, and I admire that. I admire that to no end. If you look at some of the other leagues in the city, whether it's whatever it is, lacrosse. I know that there was a problem with lacrosse a few years ago where there was a turnover and they were screaming looking for people to assist. There's always room on the boards of the soccer leagues in the city. The Little League boards are always looking for parent volunteers. So there's lots of places for people to step in. So maybe that's something to consider. This is a special time of the year. The need is there all year long, but as we go through this season of Advent, which I need to take a sidebar on this because this is one of Jim's pet peeves is, and that's putting it too strongly because I'm not trying to change the world, but people go around and wear Christian with a big capital C on their foreheads, and sort of, I'm a Christian, and yet when you scratch the surface, they really, they know less of it than they think they do. And so, because the season we're in today, of course, is not Christmas. For Christians, Christmas doesn't start until Christmas Day. And so Christmas Eve is exactly that. It's the eve of Christmas. Just like Halloween is the eve of the Feast of All Hallows or All Saints, which is on the 1st of November. Well, in the same way, the Christmas season starts on Christmas Day, December 25th. Up until the night of the 24th, there's a period of 4 weeks called Advent, which from the Latin is, to the coming, or in acknowledgement of the birth of Jesus Christ on Christmas Day. So Christians, if they were to be literal about it, would be preparing in Advent for this wonderful celebration that happens starting on December 25th. And then there are 12 days of Christmas. We all know the song about a partridge in a pear tree and the 12 days of Christmas. Well, the 12 days of Christmas actually begin on Christmas Day and end on January 6th. And in some countries where Christmas is celebrated, and Christmas is pretty much celebrated everywhere nowadays, but in Spain, for instance, the holiday back in the day before everything became so homogeneous. The Feast of the Gifts was the feast of the feast of the when is to celebrate when the Magi, when the wise men came, or the kings from the east came and visited Jesus in the as he lay there in the manger. So it's the feast of, in Spanish, Los Regalos, the gifts. So little children in Spain back in the day got their gifts on January 6th, which was the 12th day of Christmas, and that was the day reserved for that, and they received their gifts on Los Regalos. So, but commercial lunacy has driven us from that over the years. So we find ourselves now in a sort of a period where these things are dictated by Black Friday and Black Thursday, and there's a day now, isn't there, coming up? It's like the last day when you can have stuff shipped from Amazon on FedEx or UPS. It's like the last day to order so that it will arrive on time, and that always comes up faster than I think it's going to. So it's probably sometime next week, but. Yeah, so I like to think of this season that we're in as a time for some introspection, to sort of self-examination and thinking about thinking about things in the world and where you are in the world and what you might do. And when it comes to our schools, we do have a new year starting for our schools with a new school board. And with the last meeting with Mayor Gatsis was on Monday night, last night, and so we'll see what happens with the new regime led by Joyce Craig starting next month. I have stayed away from school board meetings over the last couple of months, just because I felt as though this current board was in its sort of what would you call it? Its final throes, and so I'm hopeful that they left a clean slate for the new board coming in to take action. And unless there be any doubt, this new board is very diverse. It's diverse. Not as diverse as it ought to be, but across the political spectrum, I think it's a little diverse. If you go back to a few boards ago, a couple of boards ago, and for a while, the nature of the school board in Manchester was, to put it simplistically, was you had Deb Langton and Art Beaudry as the two sort of contrarians versus the remaining 10. And then that changed somewhat 2 terms ago when Alderman or school board member at large Rich Gerard joined the board, and brought his perspective, and then you had Lisa Freeman joined the board, bringing hers, and so now there was a there was a change. Now there were a number, and I think importantly also, Mr. Beaudry became the chairman of the board, the vice chairman of the school board, etc. So it changed the dynamic a little, and it was no longer just Deb Langton and Art Beaudry versus the rest, but rather it was more. There were different pockets, and some of that was awful, and some of it was a little better. When you read the tea leaves on the new school board, and we'll see what that is, and I'll be paying attention from the time they start in January. There's an interesting group of people who, some of them very new to politics and to the school board, which honestly I'm hoping is a good thing. I'm kind of in bated breath about one or two, but you know, who am I, right? These people were chosen by people in the city. They definitely have something to offer. Having fresh perspective, I think it will be a good thing on the school board. I hope it doesn't. I'm hoping it doesn't devolve into people getting back into their little trenches and putting their popguns out over the top and starting to do some of this bing bang bang bang, taking pot shots at each other. I think having a variety of opinions on the school board could end up being a very positive thing. I know that, and I'm also hopeful that a school board chaired by Joyce Craig will have a different tone and tenor to it than one led by Mayor Gatsis. And that's not to dump on Mayor Gatsis. You know, he had his strengths, etc. But you know, creating collegiality and a sense of common purpose wasn't really one of his strengths. And I'm not trying to take any pot shots. I think that's just the way it is, right? That's whatever pluses he had, and he certainly had some. That wasn't one of them. So I'm hoping that Joyce Craig is a strong leader, and that she is purposeful and comes out of her corner, you know, ready to fight for the things she believes in. But I also hope that she is able to navigate these challenges and create some coalitions of common purpose, so that we take some of the bottled up excitement about what's happening in the city, and perhaps we can absorb some of it into the school board side. Because that would be exciting, you know, when we look at there was a piece on the newspaper the last couple of days about some businesses opening on Chestnut Street, a new pizza place, and a new some other places, some other businesses. I think I heard that there was a tailor's opening. Oh no, a menswear shop was opening there, and I'm like, how exciting is that? And so, personally, I'm excited about the idea that we're going to have this store called the Bookery, a bookstore in Manchester, which will have a coffee shop attached to it, and an area to sort of sit and read and converse, and even there might be a small performance space in the sense of 3 or 4 people in a corner kind of thing. But this is a well-known model, and I love the idea of what's called a curated bookstore. In other words, rather than going to, and I'm not anti Barnes and Noble, but Barnes and Noble doesn't do a good job of like helping you in your choices. It's not what it does best. Whereas a really good bookstore that's well curated with knowledgeable staff, you know, you go in and you want to buy a really nice book for your wife, for your mother, you know, for your teenage son, for, you know, Uncle Joey, in Ohio, and you talk to the people in the bookstore, and they you know, you swap some ideas, and they say, oh, you know, you really got to try this one. And it's so much more. Now, it doesn't mean it'll always be right, okay, but it's a lot better than standing at Barnes and Noble and sort of looking at the shelves, and you know, you're there, you're like, that's a cute looking cover. You know, I like the design of that one, and you know, it's so the Bookery is a place that I'm excited to see come to the city. And then, of course, the other thing is another one is this cafe that's opening, or bar. Which is a games bar. So the model is that it has all kinds of board games of everything you could imagine, and you can go in and sit and chat and have a drink, have a bite to eat, and play your board game. Like what a great idea! And both of those, both the board game, the game place, and the Bookery, which is the name of the bookstore, are both going to be open, as I understand it, either just after Christmas, but in the January time frame, and they're both on Elm Street. So there's some excitement. And then, so if we could, instead of just grasping at straws in our schools about some teacher who wins an award, which is all very admirable, if we could actually create some of the same level of guess what's happening here, guess what's happening here, guess what's happening here. If we could have that same iterative, gathering momentum, let's go, to a point where our schools are at, sort of full steam ahead, excuse the pun, would be a wonderful thing. I have to say that watching the school board, an aldermanic meeting recently, though bothered me a lot, because this had to do with the Gill Stadium and the fact that Gill Stadium needs a new surface. It needs to be replaced. Now, West High School's playing surface was recently replaced, and I believe it was $1.3 million it cost to do that. And, so we had aldermen talking about this, and I was just appalled at the comments about people not wanting to. So the idea is to bond the money to pay for the upgrade of Gill Stadium so that it would have a new playing surface. The current playing surface is actually dangerous. It's not just that it's well over its lifetime and overused, but it's also dangerous. There's a measure of hardness that if those tests were ever done on that field, then the field would have to be, as I understand it, would have to be abandoned. And so those tests are not done for that reason. It's sort of don't ask, don't tell. But clearly there's a need to, and if you don't know, like, just go and look or ask somebody. The question about whether Gill Stadium needs its surface replaced or not is not really up for debate. Whether it does need it. Now the question is, what we should do about it. And when I listen to, this is the problem that I have with some aldermen today in the city of Manchester. So the answer, we've got 15,000 children, or 14,500 children in our school system. We have young people living in our city that are well beyond that age. So what do kids, once they age out of high school, do? The 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds, maybe they need a place to play. And could use a facility like this. Maybe there are adult leagues that could use a facility like this. Now, Gill Stadium is an iconic stadium. You go to Bill Ball Stadium in Exeter, or you go to the Holman Stadium in Nashua, or the various other places around the state where people take pride in their city and in their city facilities. And there is no better located, center city, highly used, highly visible gem in the city of Manchester than Gill Stadium. So I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, to listen to aldermen saying, I heard Jolie Kelly Levasseur state that, if the kids need a place to play, we spent the money on West High School, and there's a field over at Memorial. Why can't they play at Memorial or play at West High School? Because, the city, his point, as I understand it, and I actually have to admit, I turned it off. I was watching it on TV, and I turned it off because it wasn't doing me any good, and I wanted to try and digest my dinner, and I couldn't do it listening to these people talking like this about our great city. And so, the idea that we should leave Gill Stadium in a state of disrepair, it just tells you everything you need to know about the small-mindedness and the pettiness of some of our public representatives. I know they mean well. I'm not, I'm not. They're not trying to be evil, bad people. They think they're doing the right thing, but they're small-minded people. They're little people with little minds and small ideas about the future of our city. So everything is about stacking one cent on top of the other and put another cent on top of that, and jam jars and jelly jars in the kitchen where you put your pennies in to pay for different things, and that's their small-minded Dickensian view of economics and of development and of the city, and I reject it all out of hand. I think it shouldn't even be a debate in the city of Manchester as to whether Gill Stadium gets its new surface or not. We should do it, and what we should be talking about not is whether we do it or not, and not whether we can get the absolute minimum we can get and see if we can, get the cheapest thing we can get and cut as many corners as we can so we don't. Which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is where it will end up, because that's the kind of small-minded people that we have in the city making these decisions right now. And I'm not pointing at Parks and Rec in this regard, etc., because I know that they do a wonderful job trying to do what they do on the minimum budget that is allowed to them. But our aldermen should be fighting for these things in our city and holding it up and saying, look at you should be able to walk into Gill Stadium with your chest stuck out, proud as could be, delighted with the beautiful facility that is, the largest city in the state of New Hampshire, a city that has ambitions to be a great city for the future, a welcoming place for families and for people to come and have fun. And Will Stewart with his, stay, work, play, and the innovation center, and all these people with the different things going on in our city, and the excitement around them, and companies opening and things happening, and then we have aldermen sitting there, and they have they will sweat an asset like Gill Stadium. Gill Stadium should have. We should be going out looking for the best possible solution, and notice I say the best possible solution, which isn't necessarily the most expensive. But there should be no trying to save 5% in order to do the right thing. They should do the right thing at Gill Stadium. So when you walk in there, it is a beautiful facility that all of us are proud of. And I, as one taxpayer in the city, am very happy to do it. I want my city to be a place that I can be proud of, and that shows its pride by investing in its future and investing in the future of its children. Every young man and woman who steps out onto the field for Manchester Central football, or for soccer, or for, why couldn't we, lacrosse could be played on there if it was a proper artificial surface. The field hockey teams. There are so many, baseball is there right now, and it just isn't suitable for baseballs. They've been trying to make this work, so hopefully they can do something to have a better solution for baseball than they are here today, than they have today. My point, ladies and gentlemen, is not that I'm agitated. Well, I am actually agitated about the Gill Stadium thing. It's indicative of the kind of decisions that these small-minded people make all the time. And so you, the taxpayers of Manchester, need to talk this stuff up, and you need to grab these people by the ear and explain to them that the future of Manchester is in their hands, and they need to be big boys and girls and step up and invest in our future, and forget this constant. We've had. This idea that we can't afford it is just a complete nonsense. It's something that's created artificially by so-called fiscal conservatives in our midst, and of course they're not fiscal conservatives at all, because fiscal conservatism is dead. A Republican Party that will pass a so-called tax reform bill, which is really a tax giveaway bill. That gives $1 trillion to the richest 0.1%, 0.1% in the country, is it's unconscionable. It's actually it's ethically unsound. It is morally unsound. And to have someone like President Trump, and I tried to stay away from railing against him because he's too easy a target. But for him to stand in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, and say, this thing's going to cost me a fortune. I'm going to make no money out of this. Well, it's like all the other lies he's told, and he lies all the time, and everybody, his biggest supporters that I know, all admit that he lies all the time because only an absolute, I don't know what, moron could listen to him and not know, not have seen the lies, because he says two different things at the same time, and obviously he's lying on one of them. So he is, he's a guy who doesn't, truth and honesty are not things that reside in his house. So he stands in front of you and says, this thing is going to, and yet, study shows that that his tax cut is $5 billion, and that which is an amazing number. It's easy to say it. It's like it should take a lot longer to say it, because all those zeros should take like 5 minutes to come out of your mouth, rather than a nice word like a billion. If you actually ever saw a billion, it would fill up some neighborhoods. Billions of dollars for him and his friends. It's just unconscionable. And at the same time, the very people who support him the loudest, his loudest supporters here in Manchester, will have you believe that we can't afford to have our children play on a nice surface at Gill Stadium. And they're the same people who supported Bill O'Brien and his buddies when they were reducing expenditures on schools and passing costs down to the taxpayers of Manchester, so that our taxpayer bills would go up, our property taxes would go up, and with the tax cap keeping the squeeze tightly on it, so that we couldn't really increase at the rate at which costs were being passed down to Manchester from Concord was higher than the rate, the 0.06% or the 1% or the 0.8% per year that we were maxed out at being allowed to spend under the tax cap, which was, so the bottom line is we had a net reduction in taxes. And I've railed against the issue of the $29 million given to the tobacco industry when we reduced taxes on tobacco 5 years ago. An action that still, doesn't quite make me wake up at night, but I just find it appalling to listen to Republican, in particular Republican senators in this state, talking about fiscal rectitude and holding the line and doing the best they can to spend the scarce taxpayer dollars. Are you kidding me? So now the latest, you might have seen that there was supposed to be a decision made about tolls in New Hampshire at the Executive Council last week, and Governor Sununu had the decision taken off the agenda to have it delayed for another couple of weeks. So there's going to be some public debate. I think there's one tomorrow night at City Hall. If I'm right, I think it's Wednesday the 13th at City Hall in Manchester is one of two debates in the state on increasing the tolls. Now, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, the tolls have not been increased in 10 years. Secondly, the tolls have actually been reduced, so they've been eliminated in some places, like on Route 3 in Merrimack. But also, besides that, when electronic tolling was introduced as an incentive to have people use the electronic tag for going through the tolls. When you drive through the tolls in Hooksett, you pay $1 if you're using cash. But if you're using electronic tolling, it's 70 cents. So we had a 30% decrease in tolls just to encourage people to use electronic tags. And then actually, that incentive is all the wrong way around. In actual fact, because it's much more convenient to drive through the tolls without having to stop and wait to hand in, change, and as the rain and wind comes in through the window, you just drive through. And now we've got overhead tolling, so you just drive right through. It's much more convenient. And I think if we'd never reduced the tolls 10 or 12 years ago from $1 to 70 cents. If we left them at $1 and instead said, we let you can pay $1 if you stop and take the 3 minutes it takes to, get your money and get your change at the booth, or you can pay $1.10 and drive right through without stopping. I think a significant number of people would have paid $1.10. And I think that's the model that Microsoft would use, or Apple computers were used, or Comcast, who are robbers, would definitely use, or any normal business operating on normal business criteria would. That's the method they would use. They would offer increased convenience, and they would charge something extra for the increased convenience. What we did was we offered the increased convenience and reduced the cost in order to encourage people to use it. Well, in any case, as it may be, that's what was done. Today, if the proposal is to go back to $1. So if we were to go to $1 on this, we would, in actual fact, we'd just be going back to where we were 10 or 12 years ago. And there'd still be no real increase. And in this case, ladies and gentlemen, the revenues, some of which will be gotten from people out of state, because we're going to, and I don't know why, we're going to allow people who use the tolls frequently to have cheaper tolls. This proposal would deliver an additional $35 million to the State Department of Transport. And as many of you probably know, or should know if you're paying attention, the state's transportation infrastructure is in terrible in a terrible state. We have roads and bridges that are, you can't be too alarmist about it. I mean, some of our bridges are in danger. Some of them are actually closed when you go around the state, and many of them are redlined, which means they're one step away from having to be shut down. And so we have all kinds of costs. There's a problem with the Amoskeag Bridge, where there is rust there. The 293 river crossing on the south side of Manchester. One of those bridges is significantly undermined, and that one is going to be replaced now. But there are huge projects that need to be tackled, and the state doesn't have any money to do it. So this minor change to the tolling would allow this stuff to happen. But yet we have people in the state who rail against it because, this is government reaching into our pocket, and they're just trying to take more to do less with, and all. And it's all nonsense. It just doesn't make any sense, ladies and gentlemen. Government, you need to invest in your society, invest in your infrastructure, invest in what is around you in order to advance the economy and society, etc. There's a wonderful example of this, right now down in Houston, where after the huge rains that came after the hurricane, there was tens of millions of tons. This is an amazing number, but tens of millions of tons of silt was washed down and into Houston, into the ship channel in Houston. And the ship, I was listening to this on NPR the other day, and they were doing I love that long form stuff that they do, but they were talking about the project in Houston to dredge the shipway. Now, if you think I'm going off into something that what has this got to do with anything? Here's an example of the shipping channel in Houston is dredged, every day, 52 weeks of the year, and this has been going on for 100 years, and it's done so that the channel is kept open. It's the largest port in terms of tonnage in the United States. So vast amounts of our products are exported through there, and our imports come in through there. The channel, the channel could be opened faster, and bigger ships could go in and out of there if the money was available to pay for more dredging. But the budget comes through the Army Corps of Engineers. The budget has never been enough to do the dredging to the extent that is needed, and now that's aggravated by the fact that all the silt that has come down into Houston, into the Houston Riverway. Now, my point is that it's going to cost consumers in the United States more money because the bigger ships won't be able to come in and say one ship with 100 units won't be able to go through, so it'll have to be replaced by two ships carrying 50 units each, or whatever the number is. And so there will be additional cost. It'll take longer time to market. So more ships, more crews, higher cost per unit, whether it's a TV, a phone, a couch, a car, whatever it might be, going in or out. So it's not just a limit on imports, it's a limit on exports too. So you could do a mathematical equation. It might take a little while to say that if the government of Texas were to invest in a more robust dredging program for Houston, that it would have an effect on consumer good prices and efficiency, and therefore prices, for every man, woman, and child in the United States. But we're never going to spend that money because we're too dumb to actually, because when you have shopkeepers, and I come from a long line of small town shopkeepers, so I can say this without some of them might be rolling in their graves, but the shopkeeper, I'm derogatory about the shopkeeper mentality because it's very simple. I took in $10. My cost of goods was $9. Therefore, I made $1. And tomorrow, if my cost of goods is $11 and I only took in $10, I'm losing money. I've got to change. And that's that small-minded. When I was talking about Gill Stadium and the small-minded shopkeepers and other small business owners that we have on our board, Mayor and Alderman, understand nothing about economics or how the real world works. We got our interstate system in the United States because Eisenhower, in his wisdom, managed to, in the post-World War II era, the interstate system is, if you look at the full name of the bill that enabled the interstate system to be built, it's the I forgot the exact wording now, but it's the Interstate and Military Preparedness Bill. So it got the votes to pass it in Congress only because people were convinced to vote for it because they were told that it would help the military to be able to move around the country or to ship material around the country. And then in the case of an attack by the next Japan or the next Germany or the next Nazis, that it was important that since they had built their autobahns and their highways, we needed to be able to move our products around. Now, of course, the whole boom in the American economy in post-World War II couldn't have happened if people were still driving like the Henry Ford and the Grapes of Wrath on some little old truck, or the Beverly Hillbillies on some little old truck across some bumpy road through the middle of Oklahoma, so you could ship products from one place to another, or you could be still sailing ships out of San Francisco to bring stuff around into Boston Harbor. But we built an interstate system which today's small-minded people would never build it because they would just see it and say, oh my God, this thing's going to cost a fortune. And it doesn't matter that you explain that it is cost-effective, that it's an investment in our future, it's something that's necessary and we need to do. We need more people of vision and ambition and of a higher level of thinking in our politics than the small-minded people that we have today, because we are being robbed left, right, and centre by smarmy salesmen in nice-looking suits down in Washington D.C. who are playing a shell game with your money and mine and robbing our children's future. Because make no doubt about it, ladies and gentlemen, the giveaway that's happening in this tax bill that we're seeing before us right now is an abomination. And no matter where you are in the world or what your current life is, in my case, I have two kids in university, and it's going to hit them right in their pockets, like immediately in big terms. So you take that and you add to it the local property tax deduction. Now there are people in Manchester who pay more than $10,000 a year in property taxes. They did introduce at the last minute anybody who's deducting $10,000 or less can still deduct it. So, which is great because it was going to cost me $7,500 worth of deductions, and I'm no rich man, and so this bill is just this Treasury bill is just unconscionable, and what it does is we're not draining the swamp, ladies and gentlemen. We're draining the money out and giving it to the richest 1% or 1/10 of 1% in the United States, to Donald Trump and his family and his buddies, so they can go on more hunting trips to Africa and build their hotels in the Cayman Islands. And it's not just him, of course. I mean, it's across the board. And make note, as sure as night follows day or day follows night, there's a time coming where we're going to be told that the government doesn't have enough money to spend money on schools, to assist us in various ways, and so we're going to have further cutbacks. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. We listen to Paul Ryan. It's as clear as the nose in your face that that's where we're going next. And they've spent a generation sucking money out of the system. So just like our Republican friends in Concord have been taking money out of the system and pushing costs down to the local level as fast as they can do it, they're doing it with the so-called voucher bill. So that they've now watered that one down as well, so that the richest of the rich will not be able to avail themselves of my tax dollars to pay for their kids to go to private schools. But many people will, but just not the richest of the rich, because there should have been rebellion if somebody, earning $1 million a year or $500,000 a year, who sends their kid to a school in Manchester that charges $30,000 a year for 5th and 6th grade, and that we, the taxpayers, the hard-working guys out every day, trying to make a living, that they're paying for it. That's what the current so-called school voucher bill does for the taxpayers of Manchester. And I will be going back to this in the new year, because there will be a day of reckoning between Barbara Shaw and I don't mean that in a threatening way. I just mean it, Barbara, I cannot wait to have Barbara Shaw on this show or someplace else, where she will explain to me how she would vote against the interests of the poorest and the taxpayers of the state of New Hampshire, and walk the walk with stripping the acid away from people once again. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's try and finish on a more positive note. Please pay attention. All of these things matter. I haven't mentioned Roy Moore, who's going to be elected or not tonight. That's for another show somewhere else. As far as education is concerned, we just need to keep our eye on the ball. A new day is coming in Manchester. We can have, Dr. Vargas has said, there's no reason why we can't have the best schools north of Boston, the best schools in New England. We should be working on that, and the small-minded people who don't want to do it should be pushed out of the way, just told that their vision's too small. Manchester's got greater ambitions. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you have a great continued preparation for the Christmas holiday, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you again, and good night from Jim O'Connell.